way back in my early 20s, I used to make extra money working as a canvasser for a political group called Washington Citizen Action based out of Seattle. Basically, they would take us to a neighborhood around 5 p.m., drop us off, and we would have to knock on doors asking for money to help with our lobbying efforts. Back then, we were lobbying to get the George W. Bush administration to start including prescription medication under Medicare. It's a cause that I believed in very much back then, and I still believe in it. Back then, we had seniors in Seattle who were taking buses to Canada to afford their prescription medication. Or if they were too poor or sick to travel, they were just going without their medication. When Medicare was created back in the 1960s, prescription drugs were incredibly cheap, so it wasn't a big deal that the government didn't cover prescription drugs under Medicare. Medicare being the governmental insurance that all Americans are entitled to once they turn 65. But in the 1990s, those drug prices started to skyrocket. Pharmaceutical companies at the time claimed that that was to cover research and development, but their own budgets revealed that most of their money was actually going to marketing and lobbying. Most research and development came from sources like the taxpayer-funded National Institutes of Health. So it was an important job, but friends, I was terrible at it. In order to keep the job, we had to collect a minimum amount of money each week, and I never once met that quota. So I was constantly about to be fired, but they were too nice to fire me. Bleeding hearts. My best friend at that job was another girl about my age who was also named Rebecca. Becca is what we called her. And she brought in more money than anyone. She was amazing. And she had a knack for convincing people that our cause was good and worthwhile and that our organization needed their money. I did not have that knack. I did believe in our cause, but I would get into these long discussions with the people I was canvassing. They would ask about what our cause was, and I was pretty well versed in it, so that wasn't a problem. But where I did run into problems was when they would ask things like, how do I know that giving you $100 is the best way for my $100 to help fix this problem? And I'd have to admit that I wasn't sure. Maybe there are better organizations. I don't know. Or they would be skeptical that I even worked for the organization in question. And I would agree, they have every right to be skeptical of some admitted pothead knocking on their door during dinner. So I would tell them, you can call the organization or you can just mail in a check to the organization. But the problem with that is that if you leave a house without money, they're really never going to get around to actually sending that money in on their own. Or I would have someone willing to give me money, but they themselves were clearly poor, which is why they understood the cause. And I would figure that they needed the money more than me. So why should they give it to my organization while their rich neighbors are slamming their door in my face? There were just too many variables. And at the end of the day, I would have to admit that people were generally right to not write a big check to the stoner randomly knocking on their door. But my coworker, Becca, had none of those doubts. She was single-minded in the fact that we had a vitally important cause, that people should give her money for the organization to fight for that cause. And sometimes she would even convince them to double the amount that they were giving before they even finished signing the check. It was amazing. And I've thought about her a lot over the years because Becca made me realize that in order to get anything done in a job like that, you need someone with that single-minded focus and that charismatic attitude. And a skeptic like me, who's constantly asking questions about whether or not what we're doing is the right thing to be doing or the best of all possible things, I can't do it. I have too many doubts. And I'm thinking about all of this right now because a new study just came out that found that politicians who are open to new ideas and experiences are less likely to win their elections. In a survey of about 3,000 Canadians, researchers found that people who are creative and open-minded are more likely to want to run for office, but once they're in a campaign up against an opponent, Whoever is the least open-minded is the one who tends to win. The researchers suggest that this might be because the most creative, open-minded people might have trouble sticking to a message. In order to mount a successful campaign, things need to be black and white in a way, and politicians need to be able to explain their positions in easy-to-understand sound bites for the general public. The open-minded, creative individual is less likely to be able to do that, in part because of doubts, skepticism, and constantly fine-tuning their views to be sure that they're doing what they believe is the right thing. Just to be clear, this was a very small effect, and in a study that only involved Canadians, so we shouldn't take this to be gospel. And there are a million other factors, of course, that can influence elections. But it strikes me that we really do see so few scientists and open-minded critical thinkers in office. Getting any politician to change their mind is a monumental effort that often requires the entire country turning against them on a particular issue, like Hillary Clinton suddenly being okay with same-sex marriage in 2015. And from a voter's perspective, we hate flip-floppers. Changing your mind is often seen as a weakness, and that perspective is often pushed by political opponents. How can you trust a politician you elect to stick to the promises they gave you during their campaign if they're constantly changing their mind? Forget about the reasons why they changed their mind, like if a check from Big Pharma suddenly lands on their desk, or if they evaluated scientific evidence and realized that their initial position was untenable. We just want consistency no matter what. So those creative, open-minded types, who also, by the way, tend to be more liberal than others, lose the election. The researchers also note that those types tend to not bother running for re-election. Hey, I get it. I quit that canvassing job after a few months of torture, and I will never, ever go back to something like that. And don't worry, I won't be running for office anytime soon. But let's get a slightly less open, but still pro-science person to run instead. And then we can vote them out when they refuse to change their mind when the data comes in.